The sister who stole my husband 2 years ago finally came back for a family dinner. She flashed her diamond ring and asked if I was still single and unwanted. My ex-husband laughed right in my face and asked if I was still pushing papers in a cubicle. I did not cry. I just took a sip of my water. Then my father stood up to make an announcement that was supposed to leave me completely homeless and broken. He had no idea I was about to let them all walk right into their own financial grave. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family who underestimated your worth. My name is Amber, and I am 34 years old. For most of my adult life, I played the role of the quiet and obedient daughter in a family that only valued loud displays of wealth and ruthless ambition. Growing up in our sprawling estate in the upscale suburbs of Chicago, I learned early on that love was entirely conditional. My parents, Richard and Susan, measured human worth by profit margins and social status. My younger sister, Ashley, who is 31, always knew exactly how to play their game. She was the golden child, the one who could do no wrong, even when she was doing the unthinkable. Tonight was supposed to be a standard family dinner, a rare occasion where attendance was strictly mandatory. I arrived on time and took my usual seat near the end of the long mahogany dining table. The dining room was suffocatingly formal, with heavy velvet drapes and an enormous crystal chandelier that cast harsh light on the fine china. I sat there in silence, listening to the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway, dreading what was to come. It had been 2 years since the scandalous divorce that shattered my world. 2 years since Ashley unapologetically stole my husband Jason right from under my nose. Jason is 35 now. When we were married, I thought we were building a quiet, stable life together. But Jason was always hungry for more. He craved the lavish lifestyle that my parents flaunted, and he quickly realized that my sister was the direct ticket to the center of the family wealth. When I caught them together 2 years ago, my entire family rallied not around me, but around them. My parents forced me to keep the peace. They told me to handle the divorce quietly to avoid embarrassing the family name in their country club circles. I was told to swallow my pride and stay out of their way. The heavy oak doors of the dining room swung open, and my stomach tightened. Ashley paraded into the room, arm in arm with Jason. They looked like they had just stepped off a magazine cover, dripping in designer labels and wearing matching expressions of absolute superiority. Ashley was wearing a silk dress that cost more than most people make in a month, while Jason sported a custom-tailored suit and a smug grin. They did not look like two people who had destroyed a marriage. They looked like conquering heroes, returning to claim their spoils. They took their seats across from me, making a show of pulling their chairs incredibly close together. Ashley immediately targeted me, her eyes narrowing with malicious delight. She raised her left hand, intentionally catching the chandelier light on the massive diamond ring Jason had bought her. "Still single?" she asked, letting a high-pitched laugh escape her lips. "I guess nobody wants second-hand goods." She looked around the table, waiting for our parents to scold her, but the room remained dead silent. Jason chimed in, pouring himself a glass of expensive scotch from the crystal decanter in the center of the table. "Hey, ugly, still the same?" he asked, his voice dripping with absolute condescension. "Still pushing papers in a cubicle somewhere." Any normal person might have thrown a glass of water in his face or burst into tears and ran from the room. 2 years ago, I might have done exactly that. But 2 years of profound, silent growth had changed me fundamentally. I did not cry. I did not shout. I did not even let my breathing change rhythm. I merely picked up my water glass, took a slow, deliberate sip, and looked at them with a blank expression. My silence seemed to irritate them more than any screaming match ever could. They wanted a reaction. They wanted to see me broken and begging for validation. I refused to give them the satisfaction. The real gut punch of the evening did not come from my sister or my ex-husband. It came from the man sitting at the head of the table. My father, Richard, cleared his throat loudly and stood up holding his wineglass. The room fell completely silent. He did not look at me. His eyes were fixed proudly on Jason and Ashley. "Good timing," he said, his voice booming with authority. "I have something important to tell all of you." He paused for dramatic effect, soaking in the attention of his favored children. "I am officially retiring. Effective immediately, I am signing over the family logistics firm Apex Transit entirely to Jason and Ashley." The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Apex Transit was the crown jewel of our family, the company my grandfather had started, and my father had expanded. I had worked there for years, putting in long hours, analyzing data, streamlining their outdated systems, and keeping my head down. I knew the company inside and out. Jason, on the other hand, knew nothing about logistics. He was a smooth talker with a failing crypto startup that he kept trying to hide from the public eye. Yet my father was handing him the keys to the kingdom. The expressions on the betrayers' faces shifted from smug to absolutely triumphant. Ashley squealed with delight and threw her arms around Jason. Jason looked like he had just won the lottery, his chest puffing out with unearned pride. I continued to sit quietly, my hands neatly folded in my lap. I knew exactly what kind of financial shape Apex Transit was actually in, but I kept that information securely locked in my mind. My father was not finished. He finally turned his gaze toward me, and his eyes were cold, void of any paternal warmth. "Amber, you have always just been a mid-level data clerk," he said, twisting the knife with calculated precision. "You lack the killer instinct needed to run an empire. Jason has the vision. He has the drive to take Apex Transit global. You have 30 days to vacate the company-owned apartment you have been living in. We need it for Jason new executives." The sheer cruelty of the ultimatum should have been breathtaking. My own father was kicking me out of my home to make room for the man who had cheated on me with my sister. I looked toward my mother, Susan, hoping for a shred of decency or a word of protest. Instead, she stepped in to defend the cruelty. She adjusted her pearl necklace and looked at me with severe disapproval. "It is just business, Amber," she said, her voice sharp and scolding. "Do not cause a scene like you did during the divorce. Your sister and Jason are building a legacy. You should be grateful we let you live there this long. You need to learn how to support your family instead of always acting like a victim." Through their swift, action-based dialogue, the entire history of my family dynamic was laid bare. My mother had always coddled Ashley, forcing me to sacrifice my own milestones, my own happiness, and my own peace of mind to accommodate my sister's demands. They expected me to lower my head, accept the eviction, and quietly disappear into the background so their perfect golden child could shine without guilt. But I was not the same woman they had crushed 2 years ago. I set my cloth napkin down on the table, smoothing out the edges with perfectly composed hands. I did not scream. I did not beg for my apartment or demand fairness. I stood up gracefully and picked up my purse. I looked directly at my ex-husband, maintaining eye contact until his triumphant smile began to falter under the weight of my absolute calm. "Congratulations, Jason," I said, my voice steady and clear, carrying through the quiet dining room. "I hope you read the fine print on Apex Transit balance sheets. Enjoy the legacy." With that, I turned on my heel and walked toward the front door. Behind me, I could hear the confused silence of my family. They had expected tears. They had expected a meltdown that would validate their narrative of me being unstable and jealous. Instead, I left them with complete and utter indifference. The crisp evening air hit my face as I stepped out onto the driveway. The heavy oak door clicked shut behind me, severing the final tie to a family that had never truly valued me. As I walked toward my car, my phone vibrated in my purse. I pulled it out and looked at the glowing screen. A high security alert had just come through from my wealth management team, notifying me that a multi-million-dollar acquisition had just been finalized entirely in my name. The game was finally changing, and they had no idea what was coming. I slid into the driver's seat of my modest sedan, shutting the door against the chilling suburban wind. For years, this unassuming car had been part of my carefully constructed camouflage. My family thought I could barely afford the lease on it, just as they thought I was a fragile mid-level clerk, desperate for their approval. I started the engine and watched the imposing facade of my parents' estate fade in the rearview mirror. They really thought throwing me out of a company-owned apartment would break me. They believed that taking away a job I only kept as a front would leave me destitute and crawling back to them for mercy. They were so blinded by their own arrogance that they never bothered to look beneath the surface. The drive from the quiet, manicured streets of the suburbs to the vibrant heart of downtown Chicago took 45 minutes. With every mile that passed, I felt the suffocating weight of their expectations lifting from my shoulders. I was no longer the discarded ex-wife or the overlooked sister. I was shedding that pathetic persona like a cheap coat. As the towering skyscrapers of the city skyline came into view, my posture straightened. The high security alert on my phone was just the beginning. Instead of heading toward the cramped corporate apartment my father had just evicted me from, I guided my car toward the financial district. I turned down a discreet private alleyway nestled between two massive corporate buildings and pulled up to a reinforced steel gate. A biometric scanner read my fingerprint, and the gate glided open silently. I drove into the private underground garage of one of the most exclusive luxury high-rises in Chicago. The attendants knew me not as the struggling daughter of a logistics manager, but as one of their most private and wealthy residents. I parked in my designated spot and walked toward the private elevator. The retinal scanner chimed in recognition, granting me access to the penthouse level. The elevator shot upward, leaving the noise and grime of the city far below. When the doors parted, I stepped into a $6 million sanctuary that my family did not even know existed. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of Lake Michigan and the glittering city below. The space was sleek, modern, and perfectly silent. There were no velvet drapes or gaudy crystal chandeliers here. Everything was designed with sharp, clean lines that reflected the woman I had truly become. I tossed my purse onto a marble console and walked into my home office. It looked more like a corporate command center than a residential study. Multiple high-definition monitors spanned the length of the wall, displaying live market feeds, global asset portfolios, and encrypted communication channels. I tapped the main screen and initiated a secure video conference. Within seconds, two faces appeared on the monitors. David was my primary wealth manager, a sharp and calculating financial strategist who managed the liquid assets of my firm. Benjamin was my lead acquisition attorney, a man who specialized in aggressive corporate takeovers. They were the only two people who knew the full extent of my empire. "Good evening, Amber," David said, adjusting his glasses. "I see you received the notification. The acquisition of the commercial real estate portfolio was finalized 10 minutes ago." I sat down in my leather, ergonomic chair and poured myself a glass of sparkling water. "Yes, I saw it. Excellent work, David. That brings our total managed assets to a very comfortable margin for the quarter." Over the past 5 years, I had secretly founded a private equity firm called Obsidian Holdings. What started as a small venture, fueled by a few smart investments, had snowballed into a ruthless and highly successful enterprise. I had built a fortune entirely on my own, while playing the role of a compliant data clerk at Apex Transit. Working at my father company had provided me with the perfect cover. It allowed me to observe the glaring inefficiencies in the logistics market and capitalize on the exact blind spots my father ignored. My family thought they were supporting a failure, while I was quietly buying up the commercial properties their competitors needed to survive. Benjamin leaned forward on his screen. "How was the family dinner?" he asked, his tone completely professional but laced with knowing irony. "Did Richard finally make his grand announcement?" "He did," I replied, keeping my voice even. "He officially handed Apex Transit over to Jason and Ashley. He also gave me 30 days to vacate my apartment. Apparently, Jason needs the space for his new executive team." David shook his head, letting out a dry laugh. "Apex Transit is a sinking ship. We have been tracking their quarterly reports through public filings and supplier defaults. Your father has been operating on outdated contracts for a decade. The company is bleeding cash and heavily leveraged. Handing that mess over to a man who knows absolutely nothing about logistics is corporate suicide." "That is exactly why I let them have their moment of triumph," I explained. "They think they won the ultimate prize. Ashley thinks she secured her future by stealing my husband, and my father thinks he secured his legacy by trusting a smooth talker. They have no idea they are standing on a financial landmine." "And it gets better," Benjamin interjected, bringing up a new document on the shared screen. "I received a very interesting loan application through one of Obsidian Holdings' anonymous lending subsidiaries about an hour ago. You are going to want to see this." I tapped my screen to expand the document. It was a formal request for a $15 million corporate bailout loan. The applicant was a tech startup that claimed to specialize in blockchain logistics. I recognized the company name immediately. It was the crypto startup Jason had been trying to launch for the past 3 years. "Jason is the applicant," I asked, scanning the financial disclosures. "Yes," Benjamin confirmed. "His crypto startup is failing miserably. He has defaulted on his initial investor obligations and is facing severe liquidity issues. He is absolutely desperate for cash to keep the operation afloat and avoid an SEC investigation. He applied to our subsidiary because traditional banks will not touch him with a 10-foot pole." I leaned closer to the monitor, my eyes narrowing as I read the collateral section of the loan application. A cold smile spread across my face. Jason was not just asking for a massive sum of money. He was offering collateral that did not entirely belong to him yet. "Look at what he is pledging," I said, my voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "He is using the operational assets of Apex Transit as collateral. He is also pledging the deed to the new house he just bought with Ashley, and several commercial properties that belong to my father's retirement portfolio." David nodded. "He is attempting to secure a high-risk personal loan by secretly leveraging your family's entire legacy. It is a textbook case of federal wire fraud. If he moves those funds offshore to cover his crypto debts, he will be breaking dozens of financial regulations. Our risk management team flagged the application immediately. They strongly advise rejecting it." I sat back in my chair and looked out the window at the sparkling city lights. 2 years ago, Jason and Ashley had humiliated me. They had paraded their affair in front of me, and my parents had demanded I stay quiet to protect their precious social standing. Tonight, they had mocked my career, laughed at my single status, and tried to leave me homeless. They wanted to destroy me. "Amber, what do you want us to do?" Benjamin asked, breaking the silence. "Do we deny the application and report the fraudulent collateral to the authorities?" I turned my attention back to the screen. The glow of the monitors illuminated my face. I thought about my mother, slapping my sister's hand in support of her cruelty. I thought about my father, coldly dismissing my years of hard work. I thought about Jason. "No," I said, my voice ringing with certainty. "Approve the loan." Benjamin blinked, staring at me through the high-definition monitor. He adjusted his tie, a gesture he only made when he was genuinely surprised. He asked for confirmation, his voice laced with careful hesitation. He warned me that approving a loan backed by fraudulent collateral meant stepping into a very complex legal gray area. If he defaulted, we would have to navigate a massive federal mess to seize those assets. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the polished mahogany desk. I told him we would not be navigating a mess. We would be executing a perfectly legal foreclosure based on breach of contract. I ordered him to draft the approval paperwork, but to deliberately bury very specific performance covenants inside. David nodded slowly, a smile beginning to form on his face as he caught on to my strategy. He knew I was giving Jason rope to hang himself. I confirmed this fact. Jason truly believed he was dealing with some faceless corporate lender that would blindly wire him $15 million and look the other way. He was incredibly desperate, and desperate men never read terms carefully. I demanded a strict domestic retention clause. The funds could not be transferred to any international banking institution or offshore account. If even 1 cent left the United States, the entire loan would go into immediate default, and all pledged collateral would face immediate seizure today. Benjamin started typing rapidly on his end. The sound of his keyboard echoed softly through the speakers. He murmured that the idea was brilliant. Jason had his entire crypto operation firmly based in the Cayman Islands. He had no choice but to wire the money offshore to cover debts. Hitting send would violate the covenant. I told them that when he did, we would own the logistics firm, we would own my father's retirement properties, and we would own the new mansion my sister just moved into. I instructed them to process the paperwork tonight and deposit the funds into his account by tomorrow morning. We would let Jason feel incredibly smart. Both men nodded, their expression shifting from concern to absolute professional respect. I ended the video call, and the large monitors in my office faded to black. The penthouse was quiet again, but the silence no longer felt heavy. It felt like the calm before a storm. I walked over to the floor-to-ceiling windows and looked out at the Chicago skyline. For years, I had played the obedient victim, swallowing every insult and every slight. Tomorrow, the dynamic would shift, permanently. The next morning, I woke up early as the sun rose over Lake Michigan. I drank a cup of black coffee in my pristine kitchen, taking my time to enjoy the quiet luxury of my real life. But I still had a role to play for a little while longer. I dressed in a pair of faded jeans and a plain gray sweater, deliberately choosing clothes that fit the narrative of a struggling mid-level data clerk. I drove my unassuming sedan out of the luxury garage and headed back to the dreary corporate apartment complex on the outskirts of the city. The apartment smelled faintly of old carpet and cheap cleaning supplies. It was a depressing space, filled with mismatched furniture and blank walls. I had never actually lived here full-time, but I kept enough clothes and personal items scattered around to make it look lived in whenever my parents or my sister dropped by unannounced to check up on me. I pulled a few cardboard boxes from the hall closet and began packing up my decoy life. I tossed old sweaters and worn-out shoes into the boxes, moving at a leisurely pace. I knew they would not wait long to make their move. My family thrived on asserting their dominance, and Ashley was never one to delay gratification. Right on schedule, a sharp knock echoed through the small apartment. It was not a polite tap, but a heavy, authoritative pounding. I walked to the front door and opened it to find a courier standing in the hallway. He looked bored, holding a thick manila envelope and a digital signature pad. He asked if I was Amber, glancing down at a shipping label. I confirmed my identity, keeping my voice very pleasant. He explained he had a priority delivery from the executive office of Apex Transit, holding out the digital pad. He stated he just needed my signature right there to completely confirm receipt of the eviction notice. I took the stylus and signed my name without a single trace of hesitation. I did not ask questions, and I did not act surprised. I simply handed the pad back to him and took the envelope. The courier gave me a brief, sympathetic look, probably expecting me to burst into tears upon receiving a formal eviction notice. He wished me a good day before turning and walking back down the long, dim hallway. I closed the door and walked back into the small kitchen, tossing the envelope onto the cheap laminate counter. I did not even bother opening it. I already knew what it said. My father had made his intentions perfectly clear at the dinner table last night. They wanted me out, and they wanted me to feel the full weight of my supposed failure. Just as the envelope landed on the counter, my cell phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out and looked at the screen. It was a text message from Ashley. I opened the message and read the words she had probably spent all morning crafting. The text told me to pack my cheap clothes because Jason needed the space for a new executive by the end of the week. She warned me not to try crying to our father about it either, confirming I was officially out. I stared at the glowing screen, reading the petty words over and over again. My sister genuinely believed she was holding all the cards. She thought this eviction was the ultimate victory, the final crushing blow that would force me to recognize my place at the bottom of the family hierarchy. She thought she was kicking me out of a cheap apartment while she sat comfortably in her sprawling new suburban mansion. I typed a response, but deleted it before hitting send. Silence was always more powerful. I locked my phone and slipped it back into my pocket. A quiet, genuine laugh escaped my lips, echoing in the empty apartment. Ashley had no idea that while she was busy gloating over a temporary corporate apartment, I was holding the deed to her own house. I owned the walls she slept in and the roof over her head. I left the boxes where they were and walked out, locking the door for the final time. I had no intention of taking any of that useless junk with me. I drove back to the city, leaving the suburbs and my fake life behind me forever. When I arrived back at the penthouse, I went straight to my home office and woke up the monitors. I logged into the secure dashboard of Obsidian Holdings, waiting to see if our target had taken the bait. A flashing red notification illuminated the center of the main screen. I clicked the alert and expanded the financial log. Jason had received the $15 million deposit from my lending subsidiary exactly 2 hours ago. He did not waste a single minute. The log showed that he had immediately initiated a massive wire transfer, routing the entire sum to a sequence of offshore bank accounts located in the Cayman Islands. He was frantically trying to cover his catastrophic crypto losses before his investors caught wind of his insolvency. But in his desperate rush to save his own skin, he had completely ignored the performance covenants buried in the loan agreement. The system had automatically flagged the massive offshore transaction. The strict domestic retention clause had been violated the very second the funds left the country. The breach of contract was absolute, instant, and entirely irreversible. A secondary notification popped up on the screen, confirming that the automatic default clause was now active. The trap had sprung flawlessly, locking all of his pledged collateral into an inescapable legal vice. Jason had just handed me total ownership of his brand new house, my father's incredibly valuable retirement properties, and the entire legacy of our family business, without even realizing it. The countdown had officially begun, and they were all going to lose absolutely everything they valued most in this cruel, cold world. I leaned back in my chair and watched the flashing red light pulse across the screen. It was a beautiful testament to their inevitable and deeply satisfying financial ruin. Unaware of the impending doom closing in around them, Ashley and Jason wasted absolutely no time aggressively flaunting their new titles. By the end of the week, they organized a lavish takeover party to celebrate their ascension to the throne of Apex Transit. They booked the grand ballroom at the prestigious country club in the Chicago suburbs. I knew the company accounts were frozen, and their personal liquidity was non-existent. They were funding this extravagant spectacle on credit, maxing out their remaining cards. I decided to attend, maintaining my cover as the struggling sister. I arrived at the country club wearing a simple, off-the-rack black dress, intentionally avoiding the bespoke designer garments that filled my penthouse closet. The grand ballroom was a sea of endless excess. Massive floral arrangements towered over the tables, and waiters circulated the room with silver trays of expensive champagne. A string quartet played softly in the corner, providing an elegant classical soundtrack to the massive financial disaster that was about to unfold right before my very eyes. My parents, Richard and Susan, stood near the center of the room, acting as the master of ceremonies for their wealthy social circle. They proudly paraded Ashley around, introducing her to local politicians and business leaders as the brilliant new future of the family business. Jason stood beside her, wearing a custom-tailored tuxedo purchased on credit. He looked like the quintessential successful executive, completely masking the desperate fraud he had just committed against the federal government. I stayed near the edges, watching the tragic performance unfold. A wealthy real estate developer, whose firm frequently contracted with Apex Transit, was asking my parents about the sudden transition of power. He politely inquired about me, asking if I would be taking on a new role within the company. My mother let out a heavy, dramatic sigh, perfectly designed to elicit immediate sympathy. "Oh, Amber is struggling," she said loudly, making sure her harsh voice carried to the surrounding guests. "We have had to financially support her for years since the divorce. It has been a terrible strain on the family, but we do what we can to keep her afloat. She just does not have Ashley drive or business acumen." Richard nodded solemnly, taking a slow sip of his expensive scotch. "Jason and Ashley are the future. We had to make the hard choice to protect the company from dead weight." Hearing my own parents describe me as a financial burden to a room full of strangers should have shattered my heart. For most of my life, those incredibly cruel words would have sent me running to the bathroom in tears. But tonight, their lies felt like a cheap comedy routine. They were bragging about supporting me while standing in a room paid for with borrowed money, celebrating a company that was functionally bankrupt. They were completely oblivious to the fact that the woman they were publicly mocking now owned the very company they were blindly boasting about. I stepped out from behind the floral arrangement. As I navigated through the thick crowd, I saw Ashley separate from her group of eager admirers. She spotted me, and her dark eyes lit up with sudden malicious intent. She changed her trajectory, moving purposefully toward me. She held a full glass of red wine in her right hand, her diamond engagement ring catching the light. I stopped near a row of tall cocktail tables, patiently waiting for the confrontation. Ashley did not disappoint me. She walked directly into my path, maintaining fierce eye contact until the very last second. Just as she brushed past me, she dramatically flicked her wrist, tipping the glass of wine forward. The dark crimson liquid splashed across the front of my simple black dress, soaking into the thin fabric and leaving a highly noticeable stain. She gasped loudly, pressing her hand to her chest in a deeply theatrical display of shock. "Oops," she said, her voice dripping with venomous sweetness. "That is what you get for standing in the way of people who actually matter. You should really learn how to blend into the background properly." I looked down at the dark stain on my dress and then back up at my sister. Her smile was remarkably sharp and entirely triumphant. She wanted me to scream at her. She desperately wanted me to cause a massive scene so she could play the victim and have security throw me out onto the street. I reached into my small clutch purse and subtly pressed the side button on my phone, activating the voice recorder app I had queued up earlier. "Are you having fun, Ashley?" I asked, my voice remaining perfectly calm and strikingly even. She leaned in incredibly close, her strong perfume overwhelming the sharp smell of the spilled wine. "I am having the time of my life," she whispered. "You look absolutely pathetic, standing here in that cheap dress. Have you found a homeless shelter yet? Or are you still begging Dad for money to survive the month? Because I told him to cut you off completely. You do not deserve a single cent of our family wealth." My mother, Susan, materialized instantly beside Ashley, having noticed the brief interaction. Instead of reprimanding my sister for ruining my dress, she glared fiercely at me. "Amber, I told you not to cause a scene tonight," my mother hissed, her tone sharp and intensely scolding. Look at you. You are a complete mess. Why do you always have to ruin your sister's special moments? You are nothing but a bitter, jealous failure, and you are embarrassing us in front of our friends. I kept my hand firmly inside my purse, ensuring the phone captured every single word of their unprovoked hostility. I did not raise my voice or try to defend myself. I just nodded slowly, absorbing their cruelty one final time. "You are right, Mom," I said softly. "I should go clean this up immediately. Enjoy your wonderful party." I turned away from their victorious smirks and walked toward the hallway that led to the private restrooms. The long corridor was heavily carpeted and dimly lit, offering a sudden, quiet refuge from the noisy, crowded ballroom. I pulled my phone from my purse and stopped the recording, saving the precious audio file securely to my encrypted cloud storage. It was the perfect piece of evidence to prove their malice when the right time came. As I approached the restrooms, I heard a tense voice echoing from the small alcove near the emergency exit. The tone was utterly frantic, completely stripped of the arrogant confidence I had seen earlier. I slowed my steps, pressing my back against the wall. It was Jason. He was pacing like a trapped animal, his phone pressed against his ear. "What do you mean, the transfer failed?" he hissed, his voice cracking with pure panic. "I wired that $15 million to the Cayman accounts yesterday morning. It should have cleared by now. My investors are threatening to go to the federal authorities if they do not get paid by midnight." I held my breath, listening intently as his entire world began to collapse. There was a long pause as the person on the other end of the line spoke. Jason's face turned pale ashen white in the dim light of the hallway. He gripped his hair tightly. "Frozen!" he shouted suddenly, losing control of his volume. "How can the funds be frozen? What performance covenants? It was an anonymous bridge loan. They do not have the authority to lock those accounts. You need to fix this right now, or I am going to lose the house, the company, and everything else I pledged as collateral. If that money does not reach offshore today, I am going to prison." I stood perfectly still in the dark shadows of the silent, isolated hallway, listening closely to the desperate reality of his truly terrible situation unfolding before me. The absolute financial trap I had so carefully set was executing flawlessly, and the heavy, impenetrable walls were finally closing in fast all around him today, leaving him with absolutely no escape from his inevitable ruin. I remained perfectly still in the shadows, waiting for Jason to end his frantic call. I knew I needed to maintain my composure for just a little while longer. I stepped out from the dim alcove, smoothing the ruined fabric of my stained black dress. The music from the grand ballroom drifted down the corridor, a stark contrast to the financial devastation brewing behind the scenes. I began walking back toward the main event, intending to retrieve my coat from the coat check and make my quiet exit. I had gathered all the evidence I needed tonight. But as I rounded the corner leading back to the opulent foyer, my father stepped directly into my path. Richard held a fresh glass of scotch, his face flushed with the pride of the evening. He looked me up and down, his eyes lingering on the dark wine stain splashed across my chest. Instead of asking if I was all right, or showing a single ounce of paternal concern, his upper lip curled into a familiar sneer of absolute disgust. He possessed an uncanny ability to make me feel small with a single glance. "Amber, where do you think you are going?" he asked, his voice low and commanding. "You cannot walk out into the main lobby looking like a complete disaster. You are embarrassing the family name." I kept my face blank, refusing to take the bait. "I am leaving, Dad," I said softly. "Ashley already made sure my dress was ruined, so there is no reason for me to stay and celebrate." My father scoffed, waving his hand dismissively. "Your sister was just having a little fun. You have always been far too sensitive. But before you leave, there is something we need to settle." His eyes drifted away from the wine stain and locked onto the delicate diamond and sapphire necklace resting against my collarbone. It was my grandmother heirloom, a beautiful vintage piece she had specifically bequeathed to me before she passed away. She had always told me I possessed a quiet strength she admired, and she wanted me to have it as a symbol of resilience. My mother had fought tooth and nail to take it from me during the reading of the will, but the legal wording was ironclad. Now my father was staring at it with an undeniable sense of entitlement. "Take that necklace off," he ordered, holding out his empty hand, expecting blind obedience. I stared at him, genuinely taken aback by the sheer audacity of his demand. "Take it off," I repeated, keeping my voice steady. "Why would I do that?" Richard let out a heavy, impatient sigh, as if he were explaining a very simple concept to a particularly slow child. "Because today is a monumental day for your sister. She is officially stepping into the role of Chief Executive Officer. She is securing the legacy of our entire family. That necklace is a precious family heirloom. It should be worn by the woman who is actually carrying our name forward, not someone who pushes papers and lives off our charity." He leaned in closer, the smell of expensive scotch rolling off his breath. "It belongs to a winner, Amber. Take it off right now, and I will give it to Ashley as a congratulatory gift." My blood ran ice cold, but my heart beat with a steady, powerful rhythm. For my entire life, I had surrendered my toys, my opportunities, and my peace of mind to appease my sister. But I would never surrender the one thing my grandmother had given me. "No," I said flatly. The word hung in the air, sharp and absolute. My father blinked, clearly unaccustomed to hearing that word come from my mouth. "Excuse me?" he growled, his face darkening. "I said no, Dad. This necklace belongs to me. Grandmother left it to me, and I am not giving it to Ashley so she can play dress-up while destroying a company she knows nothing about." My refusal acted like a physical blow to his massive ego. He took a threatening step forward, but before he could say another word, my mother appeared from the edge of the ballroom. Susan hurried over, her designer heels clicking sharply against the polished marble floor. She had seen the confrontation brewing and rushed over to ensure I was put back in my proper place. "What is going on here?" she demanded, glaring at me. "Why are you causing another scene, Amber?" "She will not hand over the necklace," Richard complained, sounding almost childish in his frustration. "I told her it should go to Ashley to celebrate her massive promotion tonight, but she is being utterly selfish." My mother's eyes narrowed into dangerous slits. She looked at me with a level of pure hatred that no mother should ever direct at her own child. "Amber, take that necklace off this instant," she commanded, her voice shaking with intense rage. "You have ruined enough of this evening with your pathetic, stained dress and your miserable attitude. Your sister deserves that heirloom. She is building a real life with a successful man while you have absolutely nothing to show for your age." I looked at the two people who had brought me into this world. They were completely devoid of any parental love, blinded entirely by their obsession with wealth and their toxic favoritism. "You can threaten me all you want," I said, keeping my posture perfectly straight. "But you are not getting this necklace. Ashley already took my husband. You already took my job and the apartment. You are not taking the only piece of genuine love I have left from this family." The truth of my words must have struck a nerve that Susan could not bear to face. The reality that she was a terrible mother was too much for her fragile narcissistic ego to handle. Enraged by my defiance and my absolute refusal to cower, she stepped up and swung her arm. Her open palm struck my left cheek with a sickeningly loud crack. The sharp sting of the slap radiated across my face, sending a sudden shockwave through my jaw. The sheer force of the impact turned my head slightly to the side. A few guests standing near the coat check gasped in horror, suddenly falling completely silent as they witnessed the physical violence. The luxurious hallway grew incredibly still. My mother stood there, breathing heavily, her chest heaving as she pointed a shaking finger directly at me. "You are dead to this family!" she screamed, her voice echoing harshly off the polished marble walls. "You are nothing but a bitter, jealous failure, and we are completely done with you, forever!" I did not flinch at all. I did not raise my hand to touch my burning cheek. I slowly turned my head back to face her. I looked directly into my mother's furious eyes, and then shifted my gaze to my father's shocked expression. I absorbed their absolute hatred, committing the moment to memory. "Remember you said that I said my voice dangerously calm and chillingly quiet?" I turned around and walked away from them. I held my head high, keeping my shoulders pulled back and my spine perfectly straight. I did not look back as I retrieved my coat from the stunned attendant. I walked out the heavy glass doors of the country club, stepping out into the crisp, cool night air. The darkness felt deeply comforting. I walked across the sprawling parking lot until I reached my unassuming sedan. I unlocked the door, slid into the driver's seat, and closed the door, securing myself inside the quiet cabin. The sting on my cheek was still pulsing, but it felt like a badge of honor. It was the final physical proof that I owed them absolutely nothing. I reached forward and pressed a button on my dashboard, integrating my phone with the secure car communication system. I called my lead acquisition attorney. Benjamin answered on the very first ring, his voice alert. "Benjamin," I said, staring out at the glowing lights of the club. "They just crossed the final line. Execute the complete asset freeze now. Take everything they have from them." The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my penthouse, casting long golden shadows across the polished hardwood floors. I sat comfortably in my ergonomic leather chair, wearing a silk robe, with a freshly brewed espresso resting on the desk beside my keyboard. The bitter, rich aroma of the coffee filled the room, masking the scent of blood in the water. Today was Monday. For my family, it was the day their entire universe would collapse. I took a deliberate sip of my espresso and turned my attention to the high-definition monitors illuminating my home office. David and Benjamin were already online, their faces completely serious but radiating a quiet thrill. The financial trap we had meticulously set had slammed shut over the weekend. Now, we were watching the satisfying aftermath unfold in real time. Benjamin tapped a key, bringing up a live tracking dashboard. "The automated default protocols initiated perfectly," he reported, his voice steady. "Obsidian Holdings officially holds a hard lien on every single asset pledged in his loan application. The freezing process executed across all domestic banking institutions right at the opening bell." Miles away, at the suburban headquarters of Apex Transit, the chaos was spreading like wildfire. I did not need an illegal backdoor to see it. The loan agreement required Apex Transit to provide Obsidian with automated reporting from every account pledged as collateral. Our secured lender dashboard displayed each failed transaction in real time. At exactly 9 o'clock, the payroll system attempted to process the weekly deposits for the logistics staff. The transaction failed and returned a red error code citing the contractual hold. Minutes later, Jason tried to use his corporate platinum card to order an extravagant executive breakfast for his first week as chief executive officer. The card was declined. He tried a second card and then a third. Every account covered by the lending agreement remained locked. The liquidity they needed to operate was inaccessible, and the shockwave was moving beyond the company. Across town, my father Richard was likely sitting in his custom leather recliner, expecting a peaceful morning. Instead, he was waking up to a financial nightmare. His personal wealth manager had undoubtedly called him by now to deliver the crushing news. The massive commercial real estate portfolio he had spent decades building was now under a recorded secured lien. His retirement accounts were frozen solid, tied up as collateral in a fraudulent corporate bailout loan he knew absolutely nothing about. The legacy he had so proudly handed over to my ex-husband was currently dragging him down into an inescapable abyss. I could easily imagine his face turning a dangerous shade of purple as he shouted at bank tellers demanding access to funds that no longer belonged to him. He had always believed his wealth made him untouchable. Today he was learning that there was always a much bigger fish in the ocean. Back at the office, his panic was escalating from a mild tremor to a full-blown meltdown. According to internal security logs, he had sprinted past his new executive assistant and barricaded himself inside the corner office. He locked the heavy oak door and drew the blinds, shutting out the confused murmurs of the employees gathering outside. He was trapped in a cage of his own making. The $15 million he had fraudulently secured from my anonymous firm was supposed to save his failing crypto startup. He had wired it to the Cayman Islands, expecting a smooth, silent transaction. Instead, he had triggered the automatic default clause the second the funds crossed international borders. The money was gone, locked in legal limbo, and every single asset he had pledged to secure it was now subject to immediate seizure. He had lost the company, he had lost the new mansion he bought with my sister, and he had bankrupted my father in a single weekend. A soft chime echoed from my computer speakers, indicating an incoming call to the secure external line of Obsidian Holdings. David smiled thinly on the video feed. "Right on schedule," he murmured, adjusting his glasses. "Our new client is calling the customer service desk. He sounds quite distressed." I leaned forward, resting my chin on my folded hands. "Patch him through," I instructed, my voice a hushed whisper. "Let me hear him. I want to hear every single word." David routed the audio feed directly to my office speakers. Frantic, heavy breathing filled the room, followed by a desperate, cracking voice. "Hello? Yes, please, I need to speak to an account manager immediately," Jason begged, sounding absolutely terrified. "My name is Jason. I finalized a corporate bridge loan with your firm on Friday. There has been a massive misunderstanding. All of my operational accounts are frozen. My company credit cards are declining. You have placed liens on my personal property, and I need them lifted right now." The customer service operator, a seasoned professional, trained to handle hostile defaulting clients, responded with polite, icy detachment. "Sir, your account is currently in a state of terminal default due to a direct violation of the Domestic Retention Covenant. All pledged collateral is now subject to standard asset seizure protocols. We cannot lift the holds." I listened as Jason completely lost his composure. "No, you do not understand," he shouted, his voice pitching into a hysterical whine. "The funds were supposed to stay domestic, I know, but I had a temporary liquidity issue. It was a bridge transfer. I am moving the capital back to the United States by the end of the week. You have to give me an extension. If my father-in-law finds out his retirement properties are frozen, he will literally kill me. You cannot do this to me." "I am the Chief Executive Officer of Apex Transit." The operator remained unfazed. "Sir, your position at Apex Transit is irrelevant to the breach of contract. Obsidian Holdings is acting strictly within the legal bounds of the signed agreement. There are no extensions available for this level of covenant violation. Have a pleasant day." The line went dead, leaving only static echoing in my penthouse. I smiled. The coffee had never tasted so sweet. He was begging a faceless corporate entity for mercy, completely oblivious to the fact that his discarded ex-wife was sitting in a luxury high-rise, orchestrating his absolute ruin. He thought he was fighting a banking error, but he was actually fighting me. David and Benjamin signed off. The first phase of the execution was complete, but the internal fallout at Apex Transit was just beginning. Down at the logistics headquarters, Jason was staring at his disconnected phone, trapped in his locked office. He was a desperate man, backed into a corner. He could not access the $15 million to save his crypto startup, and he could not access the company funds to run the logistics firm. Worse than the financial ruin was my father's wrath. Richard was a man who demanded total perfection, and Jason had just destroyed his entire life work in a matter of days. I watched the security feed monitor as heavy, determined footsteps approached his office. A loud pounding rattled the oak door. It was Richard, demanding an explanation for the frozen accounts, demanding to know why the bank had just locked him out of his own retirement funds. Jason stood frozen in the center of the room, his face pale and sweating. He realized with terrifying clarity that he could not hide the missing $15 million from Richard. The paper trail was too glaring, and the asset freeze was too catastrophic. If he confessed to the wire fraud, Richard would hand him over to federal authorities. As the pounding grew louder, his eyes darted around the room, landing on a framed photograph of his new wife sitting on the desk. A cowardly idea began to form in his panicked mind. He needed a shield. He needed someone to take the fall for the illegal transfer, someone who had equal access to the corporate accounts and whose signature carried weight. He needed Ashley, and he was going to drag her down with him. Jason unlocked his office door, projecting false confidence. He ushered Richard inside, shutting the heavy door against the prying eyes of the logistics staff. I watched the exchange silently through the security feed on my monitor. Jason spun a frantic web of lies, claiming there was a temporary administrative hold on the corporate accounts due to a massive international expansion deal he was negotiating. He promised the sudden freeze was a simple banking error that would be resolved within 48 hours. Richard looked deeply skeptical, his face red with lingering anger. He demanded the entire family gather for an emergency dinner that evening to discuss the financial health of their assets. He wanted a full explanation in front of everyone. I received the mandatory invitation via text message a few hours later. My mother commanded my presence at the estate, stating Richard had important family business to discuss. I dressed in plain attire, slipping back into the role of the invisible disappointment. When I arrived, the atmosphere was incredibly tense. The dining room table was set with fine china, but nobody paid attention to the food. My father sat at the head of the table, his face a mask of suppressed rage. My mother sat nervously beside him, adjusting her napkin. Jason and Ashley looked like two deer caught in headlights. Richard did not wait for the first course before launching into his aggressive interrogation. He slammed his hand against the mahogany table, making the water glasses rattle. He demanded to know exactly what was happening with his retirement portfolio. His wealth manager had informed him of a recorded, secured lien placed on his commercial properties, and he wanted Jason to explain how his leadership resulted in frozen accounts across the board. Jason stammered nervously, pulling at his collar. He repeated the lies he had constructed earlier, claiming it was a misunderstanding with an aggressive corporate lender. He insisted the funds were perfectly safe. Richard was not a fool when it came to money, and saw right through the flimsy excuses. Leaning forward, his voice dropping to a dangerous growl, he told Jason he was bringing in an independent forensic accounting team tomorrow morning to audit every ledger at Apex Transit. He threatened that if Jason had jeopardized the family wealth, there would be severe legal consequences. The panic in Jason's eyes was undeniable. An independent audit would uncover the fraudulent loan, the offshore wire transfer, and the fatal default clause. He was seconds away from total exposure. He shot a desperate, panicked look at Ashley, silently begging her to execute the emergency plan they had scrambled to put together. Ashley took a deep breath and dramatically pushed her chair back from the table. She placed a trembling hand over her stomach and let out a loud, theatrical sob. Everyone froze, turning their full attention to her. My father stopped his angry tirade, his brow furrowing in confusion. Ashley looked at Richard with wide, tear-filled eyes and announced her lie. She cried out that they could not deal with this terrible stress right now. She claimed the ongoing banking errors were taking a physical toll on her health, and she could not risk losing the baby. Pausing to let the heavy word hang in the silent dining room, she looked directly at my parents and declared she was pregnant with their first grandson. The emotional transformation in the room was instant and entirely sickening. The heavy tension vanished, replaced by an overwhelming wave of joyous shock. My mother gasped, pressing both hands to her mouth as tears of happiness streamed down her face. She rushed out of her chair and threw her arms around Ashley, hugging her fiercely. My father sat back, the dangerous anger melting off his face. He looked at Jason with profound paternal pride. A grandson was the one thing Richard had always desperately wanted, the ultimate prize to carry the family legacy forward. I sat quietly at the edge of the table, watching the incredible performance unfold. I kept my face perfectly blank, betraying no emotion whatsoever. Jason slumped back in his chair, letting out a silent breath of relief. The desperate bait and switch had worked flawlessly. Richard raised his glass of red wine, his voice thick with emotion. He declared that a new life changed absolutely everything. He apologized to Jason for his earlier temper, stating he understood the heavy pressure of providing for a growing family. He dismissed the frozen accounts as a temporary cash flow issue they would easily solve together. To guarantee their security, Richard made a monumental decision right there. He announced he was signing over the final remaining emergency family trust fund directly to Jason tomorrow morning. He wanted Jason to use that liquid capital to clear up the banking errors before the baby arrived. Jason smiled, his dark eyes gleaming with greedy triumph. He thanked my father profusely, promising to protect the family legacy. They raised their glasses in a joyous toast, celebrating the bright financial future ahead. I raised my simple glass of water, taking a slow, deliberate sip. They were celebrating a total illusion and handing Jason the very last piece of their wealth. The dinner continued with enthusiastic talk of baby names, nursery decorations, and suburban preschools. I excused myself early, claiming I had a tension headache. Nobody tried to stop me from leaving. I drove my modest sedan back to the city, leaving the wealthy suburbs behind me. When I stepped into my silent penthouse, I went straight to my home office. I sat down at my desk and opened my laptop. Something about Ashley's sudden pregnancy announcement felt incredibly convenient. It was too perfectly timed, deployed right at the exact moment Jason was backed into an inescapable corner. I knew my sister better than anyone else did. Ashley was completely meticulous about her appearance, her schedule, and her health. Years ago, when we were on speaking terms, my parents had set up a shared family iCloud account to coordinate vacations. They had long forgotten about the shared calendar, but never bothered to revoke my digital access. I logged into the shared calendar and began scrolling through the recent months. I cross-referenced her documented appointments, looking for any visits to an obstetrician or local health clinic. There was absolutely nothing scheduled. I decided to dig a little deeper. The shared iCloud account also linked to the family digital purchase history, a feature my mother kept active to monitor my father's expenditures. I pulled up the recent digital receipts tied directly to Ashley's personal phone. I scanned through her daily coffee purchases, her expensive clothing orders, and her streaming subscriptions. Then I saw it. A digital receipt generated just 4 hours before the dinner. It was a payment confirmation for an order from a novelty website. I opened a new browser tab and searched the website name. The screen quickly loaded a brightly colored page advertising custom prank gifts. Their top-selling items were highly realistic, fake ultrasound photos and positive pregnancy tests designed specifically to fool friends and family. I looked back at the digital receipt on my screen. She had paid a premium for expedited digital delivery of a customized, fake ultrasound profile directly to her private email inbox. A cold, victorious smile spread slowly across my face. The sheer audacity of their lie was truly breathtaking. Ashley was not pregnant. She had deliberately ordered fake medical documents online to emotionally manipulate my father into handing over the last remaining emergency trust fund to save her husband from total financial ruin. They were actively defrauding our own parents to cover up the wire fraud. I opened a secure encrypted folder on my desktop. I dragged the digital receipt for the fake ultrasound into the new folder. I added a screenshot of the novelty website and a detailed log of her empty medical calendar. Next, I pulled the critical financial files from Obsidian Holdings. I added Jason's original loan application, where he fraudulently pledged my father's retirement properties as collateral. I added the internal banking logs, clearly showing the immediate $15 million offshore wire transfer to the Cayman Islands. Finally, I added the automatic default notifications and the active federal asset liens currently holding their entire lives hostage. I organized every single piece of data meticulously. I compiled the devastating evidence of the fake pregnancy, the illegal wire fraud, and their impending total bankruptcy into a single pristine digital dossier. I leaned back in my heavy leather chair, staring intently at the completed file resting on my monitor. They thought they had won tonight. They genuinely believed they had secured their future by lying to an old man desperate for a grandson. They had absolutely no idea that they had just handed me the final nail in their coffin. I had everything I needed now. The weapon was fully loaded, and I was completely ready to drop the bomb. By early Tuesday morning, the financial walls finally breached their personal sanctuary. Registered couriers arrived at the sprawling gates of my parents' suburban mansion, delivering thick stacks of certified mail. Through digital alerts forwarded by my legal team, I knew exactly what those heavy envelopes contained. They were formal notices of immediate foreclosure. The massive estate that served as the ultimate symbol of my father was officially listed as collateral in terminal default. I could only imagine the sheer panic that gripped Richard, realizing the bank was seizing the roof over his head. Unaware of the true depth of Jason's catastrophic wire fraud, my parents were scrambling for a lifeline. They believed this was a temporary liquidity crisis rather than a fatal blow. Anticipating their next move, I drove to my fake corporate apartment to finish packing the decoy boxes and clear out my undercover existence. When I arrived, the stale smell of the complex felt like a relic from a past life. I unlocked the thin wooden door, stepped inside, and reached into my tote bag. I pulled out a small wireless security camera. I placed it discreetly on the top shelf of the living room bookcase, nestled between two dusty paperback novels. I synced it to my phone, ensuring the lens captured the living space. The red light blinked twice before fading. I pulled a roll of packing tape from a drawer and began sealing the cardboard boxes I had filled earlier. The methodical sound of the tape echoing in the quiet room was soothing. I was taping shut the final box when heavy footsteps pounded down the exterior hallway. The doorknob rattled violently, followed by aggressive pounding that shook the cheap doorframe. "Amber, open this door now!" my father bellowed, his voice carrying a clear note of frantic authority. I took a deep breath, smoothing my plain gray shirt. I turned the deadbolt, pulling the door open. Richard and Susan pushed past me, instantly invading the small space. My father looked terrible. His face was flushed, a dangerous shade of red, and his golf shirt was wrinkled. My mother looked equally disheveled, clutching her designer handbag tightly. They practically vibrated with a frantic, nervous energy. "You are incredibly hard to reach," Amber, Richard snapped, turning to glare at me as I calmly closed the door. Do you not check your phone?" "I have been busy packing, Dad," I replied, keeping my voice perfectly even and gesturing to the sealed cardboard boxes scattered across the stained carpet. "You gave me an eviction notice, remember? I need to be out." Susan waved her hand dismissively, batting away the reality of my eviction, as if it were a trivial detail. "Never mind the apartment. she said, her voice sharp and breathless. "We have a more pressing family emergency to deal with, and we need you to step up and do your part for once." I crossed my arms over my chest, maintaining a neutral expression. "What kind of emergency?" Richard paced the living room, running a hand through his thinning gray hair. "Apex Transit is dealing with a severe but temporary banking error. Some overzealous corporate lender has placed ridiculous holds on our operational accounts, and those holds have frozen my personal assets as well. It is a massive bureaucratic mess." He paused, looking at me with a desperate stare. "But right now we need liquid cash. Your sister is pregnant with our first grandson, and she is dealing with severe stress from this banking situation. She has urgent medical expenses, and the baby needs a completely stress-free environment. We cannot access our funds." I stared at him, letting the absolute absurdity of his demand wash over me. He was standing in the cheap apartment he was kicking me out of, asking me for money to support the sister who had destroyed my marriage. And he was doing it to protect the man who had bankrupted him. "So what exactly are you asking me to do?" I asked, my tone completely devoid of emotion. Susan stepped closer, invading my personal space. "We need you to go to your local bank this afternoon and take out a personal loan. Your credit score has always been excellent. We need you to borrow $100,000 in your name and transfer it to Ashley Medical Fund today." I almost let out a genuine laugh. The woman before me, 100-watch, worth more than my supposed annual salary, was demanding I plunge myself into massive debt for a fake pregnancy. They believed I was a financial stepping stone, to be used and discarded at their convenience. I looked directly into my mother, furious, anxious eyes. "No," I said, my voice soft but entirely unyielding. Susan blinked as if she had not heard me correctly. "What do you mean, no?" "I mean I am not going to the bank, Mom," I explained, speaking slowly and clearly. "I am not taking out a $100,000 personal loan in my name. I am not going into massive debt to fund Ashley fabricated emergencies. I am not giving you a single cent." The air in the small apartment grew dangerously thick. Susan face contorted into a mask of pure rage. The thin veneer of maternal concern vanished completely, leaving behind the toxic reality of her true nature. She stepped so close to me that I could smell the metallic scent of her hairspray. "You selfish, ungrateful little brat!" Susan screamed, her voice echoing harshly off the cheap plaster walls. "You owe us this money. You ruined her entire first year of marriage with your miserable, depressing attitude. You dragged your feet during the divorce and constantly tried to make her look bad in front of Jason. You have been a dark cloud hanging over this family for years. The least you can do is take out a loan to ensure your nephew is born healthy." I did not take a single step back. I stood my ground, absorbing her venom without flinching. Her words would have crushed me a year ago, but today, they were just the desperate thrashings of a trapped animal. "I owe you absolutely nothing," I said, my voice slicing through the heavy silence that followed her screaming fit. "You threw me out of my job. You threw me out of my apartment. You slapped me in front of your friends at the country club. And now you have the absolute audacity to come in here and demand I take out a loan for a sister who stole my husband? My answer is no. Now get out." Richard's face immediately darkened into a terrifying scowl. His fists clenched at his sides, and the veins in his neck bulged against his collar. He took 2 large, aggressive steps toward me, closing the distance until he towered over me. His physical presence was meant to be intimidating, a tactic he used for decades. "You listen to me very carefully, you worthless disappointment," Richard growled, his voice dropping to a harsh, violent whisper. "You are going to go to that bank today and sign those loan papers. If you do not do exactly what I tell you to do, I will make sure you never find a job in this state again. I will make sure you spend the rest of your miserable life crawling in the gutter. I will destroy you." He raised his hand, pointing a thick, threatening finger mere inches from my face. "Do not test me," he spat. "You have no idea what I am capable of when my family is threatened." I looked from his raised fist to the top shelf of the bookcase, where the tiny red light of the hidden security camera blinked silently in the shadows. It was capturing every aggressive movement, every screamed insult, and every single violent threat. The audio was crystal clear, and the video was transmitting securely to my encrypted cloud storage. My father handed me the ultimate leverage. I looked back at Richard, maintaining fierce, unbroken eye contact. "I will not be taking out any loans," I said, my voice ringing with chilling certainty. "And you are definitely going to deeply regret threatening me today." I let the silence stretch until the confidence in my father's face began to fracture. Then I lifted one hand and pointed toward the top shelf of the bookcase. The tiny camera sat between the paperbacks, hidden except for its status light. Richard followed my finger. His expression changed the instant he understood what he was looking at. Susan turned and stared at the lens with her mouth open. "Everything you said has been recorded," I told them. "The demand that I borrow $100,000, the threat to destroy my career if I refused, the way you entered this apartment and tried to intimidate me into signing a financial obligation for Ashley. The video is stored outside this room. Breaking that camera will accomplish nothing." Richard lowered his hand, but his face remained dark with rage. "You recorded your own parents?" he demanded, as though my decision were the betrayal, rather than his threat. "I recorded 2 people coercing me into debt," I replied. "What you just did is extortion. Mom already assaulted me at the country club in front of witnesses. Between that incident and this recording, I have enough evidence to request a restraining order and file criminal complaints. I am choosing not to argue with you anymore. That is not weakness. It means explanations are wasted on people who believe they are entitled to hurt me." Susan recovered first. She rushed toward the bookcase and reached for the camera. I stepped between her and the shelf before she touched it. The movement made her stop. For the first time, she realized that I was not going to move aside because she demanded it. "Get out of my way," she hissed. "That recording belongs to this family." "No," I said. "It belongs to me because this is my residence, and I am the person you threatened. The lease remains active until eviction expires. You have no right to seize anything inside it. Leave now, or I will call the police and give them the recording while you stand here." Richard looked toward the closed door and then back at the camera. Calculation replaced fury in his eyes. He understood evidence well enough to know the position he had created. Any attempt to take the device or touch me would only make the footage worse. Susan did not share his caution. She pointed at me and shouted that I was destroying the family over nothing. She claimed a loyal daughter would have signed the loan without asking questions. She insisted Ashley's medical needs mattered more than my pride. The camera captured every word I said quietly. That sentence silenced her. Richard grabbed Susan by the arm and pulled her toward the door. She resisted, screaming that I would regret humiliating them. He opened the door so violently that it struck the hallway wall. Before stepping out, he turned and gave me a cold look, promising retaliation. "You think a cheap recording makes you powerful?" he said. "When this banking problem is fixed, you will have nowhere left to work and nobody willing to help you." I held his gaze. "The recording is not what makes me powerful, Dad. Your belief that I still need you is the mistake that makes you weak." He stared at me before dragging Susan into the hallway. Their footsteps retreated toward the elevator, while her angry voice echoed through the building. I closed the door, locked the deadbolt, and stood motionless until the elevator doors shut. Then I released my breath. I removed the camera from the shelf. It had uploaded the confrontation to encrypted cloud storage, but I connected it to my laptop and created 2 additional copies. I preserved the original timestamps and generated a digital signature proving the file had not been altered. Benjamin had taught me never to rely on one copy when evidence could decide a legal dispute. I called him through the secure line. He answered immediately. I uploaded the video while we spoke. Benjamin watched in silence. His expression tightened when Richard threatened my career, and when Susan moved toward the camera. "This is not merely family cruelty," he said when the recording ended. "They demanded that you obtain credit through false claims about medical expenses. Richard then threatened economic retaliation to force your signature. Combined with the public assault, this establishes a pattern of coercion and intimidation." I asked him to preserve everything, but not to seek an emergency restraining order unless they approached me again. I did not want another theatrical confrontation. I wanted a documented record that could not be dismissed as a bitter family disagreement. Benjamin agreed but insisted we notify local council and create a formal incident memorandum that afternoon. He also recommended filing a non-emergency police report regarding the country club assault and today threat, so the dates would be independently documented. I approved both steps. Protecting myself did not require revenge outside the law. It required evidence, patience, and boundaries they could no longer cross. David joined the call. He confirmed that Obsidian compliance team had finished reviewing a loan file. Jason offshore transfer had triggered the contractual default, but our response still had to follow the secured lending documents and court procedures. We could freeze accounts controlled under the agreement and record liens against pledged assets. We could not simply declare ourselves owners overnight. Foreclosure notices, court filings, and verified evidence would make every seizure defensible. That distinction mattered. My family rewrote reality whenever truth inconvenienced them. I would not defeat them by becoming careless. Every step would be documented. Every notice would be properly served. Every criminal allegation would be forwarded to investigators rather than used as a private threat. I instructed Benjamin to add the apartment video, the country club witness list, and Ashley fraudulent medical request to the master dossier. I authorized Federal Compliance Council to refer the suspected wire fraud and false collateral documents to the proper authorities. If agents opened an investigation, it would be because Jason had created a trail too obvious to ignore. David brought up a new alert. Minutes after my parents left the apartment, Jason had accessed Apex Transit property files through his authorized corporate account. He downloaded the title history for the suburban estate and searched for companies that purchased distressed homes for immediate cash. Then, he scheduled a private evening meeting with downtown development partners. Benjamin examined the activity log. The company bought troubled real estate through shell entities. A legitimate sale would require Richard consent and a title search revealing our recorded lien. If Jason was pursuing them now, he was probably planning to conceal the lien or falsify authority to transfer the property. I looked around the decoy apartment at the sealed boxes and bare walls. Richard and Susan had come here believing they could force me to mortgage my future. Their favored son-in-law was preparing to sell the roof over their heads without permission. Their cruelty toward me had distracted them from the criminal at their own table. "Do not interfere before he presents the documents," I told Benjamin. "Notify the buyer legal counsel of the lien before money changes hands, and preserve every lawful record of the attempted transaction. We are not going to manufacture a crime. We are going to let Jason reveal what he will do when he believes nobody is watching." Benjamin nodded. "I will have counsel ready. If he submits a forged deed or false power of attorney, the buyer will stop the transaction and provide a sworn statement." I closed the laptop and placed the camera inside my bag. The apartment no longer felt like a disguise. It felt like a completed crime scene where my parents had documented their own abuse. As I carried the last box toward the door, my phone displayed Jason's calendar invitation for the private restaurant meeting. He was preparing his final desperate escape. I switched off the lights and left the apartment behind. By nightfall, Jason would walk into a dark restaurant carrying papers he had no legal right to sign. He believed he was arranging a fire sale. In reality, he was about to place another piece of evidence directly into my hands. Jason drove his least luxury sedan through the downpour, his hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. He parked behind an exclusive dark restaurant that catered to private, high-stakes clientele. It was the kind of establishment where deals were made, far away from the scrutinizing eyes of regulators. Jason checked his reflection in the rearview mirror, wiping cold sweat from his forehead. He grabbed the thick leather portfolio resting on the passenger seat. Inside was the forged deed to my parents' massive estate. He had meticulously copied my father's signature, praying his desperation would not bleed through the ink. He hurried through the back entrance. The maitre d' escorted him to a secluded booth in the back corner, hidden behind a heavy velvet curtain. The developer was already sitting there sipping a glass of bourbon. He was an older man, with sharp, calculating eyes and a reputation for acquiring distressed properties through anonymous shell companies. Jason slid into the leather booth. The developer demanded to see the paperwork. Jason opened the leather portfolio with trembling fingers and slid the forged deed across the polished mahogany table. He launched into a rehearsed speech about corporate restructuring and the need for rapid liquid capital. He offered the estate for a mere fraction of its true market value, emphasizing that the cash wire transfer needed to be processed tonight. The developer listened silently, his eyes scanning the fraudulent document. He noted the signature of my father and the heavily discounted sale price. A greedy smile crept across his weathered face. He reached into his tailored suit jacket and produced an expensive gold fountain pen. Jason held his breath. His heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird. This was his escape route. If the developer signed that paper and authorized the shell company wire transfer, Jason would have enough untraceable cash to pay off his furious offshore investors and vanish before the authorities descended upon Apex Transit. He watched the gold tip of the pen hover just millimeters above the signature line. He was seconds away from salvation. But before the ink could touch the paper, a sharp electronic ring pierced the quiet intimacy of the booth. The developer paused, frowning as he pulled his cell phone from his pocket. He held up a finger, signaling Jason to wait. "It is my lead legal counsel," he muttered, pressing the phone to his ear. "This will only take a moment." Jason swallowed hard, nodding enthusiastically while wiping his sweaty palms on his tailored trousers. He watched the developer face, expecting a brief conversation about routine corporate matters. Instead, he witnessed a terrifying transformation. The greedy smile vanished, instantly replaced by a look of profound shock. The developer sat rigidly upright, his eyes darting toward Jason. The color drained completely from his face, leaving him a sickly shade of gray. "What do you mean, a recorded secured lien?" the developer hissed into the phone, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "Obsidian Holdings. Are you absolutely certain about this?" Jason felt the blood freeze in his veins. The name of my private equity firm hanging in the air felt like a physical blow. He slouched back, suddenly struggling to draw oxygen into his lungs. The developer listened for another 30 seconds, his expression shifting from shock to pure, unadulterated rage. He glared at Jason with a look of absolute disgust. He muttered a quick confirmation to his legal team and ended the call, slamming his phone down onto the table. He picked up the forged deed to the family mansion, crumpled it into a tight ball, and threw it directly at Jason's chest. It bounced off his expensive suit lapel and landed on the floor. "You think I am an absolute idiot," the developer growled, his voice vibrating with barely contained fury. "You think you can use my shell company to fence a property that is currently locked under a terminal default lien? My legal team just received an emergency notification from Obsidian Holdings. They already own the debt on this estate. They own your logistics company, and they own you. Any unauthorized sale of this property is a direct violation of federal law and constitutes massive wire fraud." Jason stammered, his hands shaking uncontrollably as he tried to formulate an excuse. There has been a massive banking misunderstanding, he pleaded, leaning forward. I can clear the title tomorrow morning. I just need the cash advance tonight. The developer cut him off with a harsh bark of laughter. You are not clearing anything. You are a dead man walking. Whoever is running Obsidian Holdings is actively watching your every single move. They flagged this transaction the exact second we sat down at this table. You are entirely radioactive, and if you ever try to contact my firm again, I will personally hand this forged deed over to the district attorney. The developer slid out of the leather booth, tossed a $50 bill onto the table to cover his drink, and walked out of the dark restaurant without looking back. Jason sat frozen in the dimly lit corner, completely paralyzed by terror. The walls felt like they were shrinking, closing in around him. He looked up at the small, dark security camera mounted near the ceiling. A terrifying realization washed over him. They knew exactly where he was, what he was doing, and who he was meeting. They were playing with him, deliberately letting him exhaust every possible escape route before slamming the door shut in his face. He was trapped, sweating profusely in the dark, with absolutely nowhere left to run. By Sunday afternoon, the oppressive atmosphere of impending doom had saturated my parents' suburban mansion. I was not secretly watching their home. The details became clear later through the process server report, witness statements, and Jason's own recorded admissions. The family had gathered for their traditional Sunday dinner, but the usual boasting and arrogant laughter were absent. The dining room was silent, except for silverware touching fine china. Richard sat at the head of the table, staring at his untouched roast beef. Susan fussed with her napkin, trying to preserve the illusion of domestic calm while casting anxious glances toward her husband. Every person in that room knew the next knock could end the life they had been pretending was secure. Ashley sat near the center of the table, rubbing her perfectly flat stomach, playing the role of the stressed pregnant mother to perfection. Beside her, Jason looked like a walking corpse. His skin was pale, his eyes were bloodshot, and his hands trembled slightly as he held his water glass. He had not spoken a single word since arriving. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 6 times. Susan stood up, smoothing her designer dress, just as 3 loud, sharp knocks echoed through the sprawling house. The heavy, authoritative pounding on the solid oak front door startled everyone at the table. Richard pulled the heavy door open, revealing a man in a plain suit standing on the porch, holding a massive stack of thick manila envelopes. The man stepped forward and thrust the heavy stack of documents directly into Richard's hands. "You have been officially served," he stated, his voice carrying into the dining room. "These are court-filed default and foreclosure notices for this property and the associated commercial holdings. I am also serving federal audit notices issued to Apex Transit and preservation orders connected to the suspected wire fraud. Obsidian Holdings has begun enforcing its secured creditor rights through the courts." The heavy oak door of the dining room slammed shut behind the process server, leaving a suffocating silence in his wake. Richard stood frozen at the head of the table, staring at the thick stack of foreclosure and federal audit notices in his hands. The reality of the 48-hour deadline echoed in the quiet room like a ticking time bomb. The color drained completely from his face, replaced by a sickly ash gray. For a man who had spent his entire life building an empire of logistics and real estate, the sudden realization that it was all scheduled for immediate seizure was too much to process. He slowly lowered the documents to the polished mahogany table, his hands trembling violently. Jason remained glued to his chair, his eyes darting toward the exits as if calculating the odds of a successful escape. He knew the game was over. The offshore accounts were frozen, the properties were locked, and the federal government was now actively involved. The sheer magnitude of his fraudulent actions was laid bare on the glossy paper resting before my father. Richard raised his head, his eyes locked onto Jason, and the shock morphing into a terrifying, unhinged fury. You mortgaged my entire legacy, Richard whispered, his voice dropping to a dangerous guttural register. You took everything I built, and you wired it to a shadow account in the Cayman Islands. Jason scrambled to stand, pushing his chair back so hard it tipped over and crashed against the hardwood floor. Richard, it was a temporary bridge loan, he stammered, holding his hands up defensively. I had a liquidity crisis with the tech startup. The blockchain market crashed, and my early investors were threatening to contact the Securities and Exchange Commission. I just needed the cash for a few days to smooth things over. I was going to move it right back into the company accounts. You forged my signature on the commercial deeds, Richard roared, closing the distance between them in 3 massive strides. He lunged forward, grabbing Jason by the lapels of his expensive custom suit. The sheer physical force of my father drove Jason backward until he slammed hard against the dining room wall. The antique china cabinet rattled violently from the impact. You committed federal wire fraud, using my retirement as your personal piggy bank. We have 48 hours before the federal authorities seize this house, the company, and everything we own. Ashley screamed, jumping up from her seat. Dad, stop it! You are hurting him! She cried out, grabbing at my father's arm. He is your son-in-law. He is the father of your grandson. You cannot do this. Richard did not even look at her. He kept his massive hands twisted tightly in Jason's suit jacket, his knuckles turning white. He is a criminal, Ashley. He is a pathetic, desperate thief who just bankrupted this entire family. Jason shoved my father away, breathing heavily as he smoothed his ruined jacket. He pointed a shaking finger directly at Ashley, his own fear transforming into vicious blame. Do not act like you are innocent in this, he shouted, his voice cracking with panic. You are the reason we were drowning in debt in the first place. You demanded the new mansion. You demanded the designer clothes and the luxury vacations and the country club memberships. You spent money like it grew on trees while my company was bleeding cash. Ashley gasped, pressing a hand to her chest. How dare you blame me? She shrieked, tears of genuine outrage spilling over her cheeks. You promised me that lifestyle. You told me you were a successful tech genius. You said leaving Amber for me was the best decision you ever made because I actually understood how to live like a CEO. You lied to me. Jason laughed with a harsh, desperate sound. You knew the money was disappearing, he shouted at Ashley. Every time I warned you we needed to cut expenses, you threatened to leave. You told me a real chief executive did not ask his wife to return a car or cancel a vacation. You pushed me to keep borrowing because you cared more about what the country club thought than whether any of the bills could actually be paid. Ashley recoiled as if he had struck her. Do not put this on me, she screamed. You spent 3 years telling everyone your crypto company was about to explode. You said the loan was routine and Apex Transit would cover everything once Dad transferred control. I believed you because you lied to my face every day. Susan stepped between them, raising both hands. Stop this, she cried. The stress is not good for Ashley or the baby. We need to focus on saving the house instead of attacking each other. Richard turned on her with a look so cold that she fell silent. There is nothing routine about $15 million disappearing into offshore accounts, he said. There is nothing temporary about forged signatures, federal notices, and 48 hours to surrender everything we own. He looked from Ashley to Jason and seemed to understand that the perfect legacy he had celebrated was only an expensive performance built on debt. Jason opened his mouth to defend himself, but Richard pointed toward the legal notices spread across the table. Enough excuses, he said. Tell me who holds this debt. Who has the authority to freeze the company, place liens on my properties, and bring federal auditors to my door? I want the name of the person orchestrating this seizure, and I want it now. Jason swallowed hard, sweat dripping down his pale forehead. It is a private equity firm downtown. Obsidian Holdings. They are completely anonymous. I do not even know who the chief executive officer is. I just worked through their automated lending subsidiary. Get them on the phone, Richard commanded, his voice vibrating with absolute authority. Right now. Jason hesitated, his hands shaking as he reached for his phone. They will not take my calls, Richard. I have tried the customer service line a dozen times. They just tell me the account is in terminal default and hang up. I do not care if you have to call them 100 times, Richard roared, slamming his fist against the wall. You get a human being on the phone. You beg, you plead, and you grovel. You tell them we are prepared to surrender the logistics company entirely if they just release the liens on my personal retirement properties and this house. You tell them we want an emergency in-person meeting with the CEO of Obsidian Holdings. You do not stop calling until they say yes. Miles away in my penthouse, I sat at my desk, reviewing the service confirmations from local council. I was not listening through a hacked phone or watching an illegal camera inside their house. I did not need to. The process server had confirmed delivery, and Jason had already called Obsidian recorded customer service line repeatedly. Every voicemail exposed more panic than the last. I took a slow sip of tea as my monitor displayed a new incoming request on the priority legal line. The call was Jason again, just as Richard had ordered. Because all calls to the lender were recorded for compliance, Benjamin could lawfully hear the desperate voices in the background. He opened a secure channel to me and summarized the request. Jason was demanding an emergency meeting with the chief executive officer and offering the entire logistics company in exchange for releasing the liens on Richard's personal properties. I see the incoming request, Benjamin replied, his tone professional. How would you like me to handle him this time, Amber? Should I have the automated system disconnect the call again? No, I smiled, staring out at the glittering Chicago skyline. Let him through to your direct line. Let him deliver his pathetic pitch, and when he is done begging, you will grant his request. Benjamin raised an eyebrow. You want to meet with them face to face? It is time, I confirmed, leaning back in my leather chair. Tell Jason that the Chief Executive Officer of Obsidian Holdings has agreed to an emergency negotiation settlement. Schedule the meeting for tomorrow at 10 in the morning. Tell him to bring Richard. I want them both there to sign the papers. Benjamin nodded before cutting the feed. I sat in the quiet glow of my monitors after the screen went dark. The negotiation was set for 10. It was a request they believed would save them, but was actually the final march to their own execution. I closed my laptop and stood walking toward the expansive windows of my penthouse. The city below was a sprawling grid of streetlights, but my mind was focused on the sunrise. Tomorrow I would no longer be the discarded daughter or the pathetic ex-wife. I would finally step out of the shadows. I woke up at 6 before the alarm could ring. I moved through my morning routine with a deliberate, terrifying sense of calm. Today required a completely different kind of preparation. For the past 5 years, I had carefully styled myself to look invisible. I had worn faded sweaters, sensible flat shoes, and minimal makeup to feed their insatiable egos. I walked into my walk-in closet and bypassed the small section of decoy clothing, moving directly to the garments that represented the woman I was. I selected a bespoke designer suit in a deep shade of midnight blue. The tailoring was flawless, designed to project absolute authority. I paired it with a crisp white silk blouse and black stiletto heels that echoed with a sharp click against the hardwood floor. I sat at my vanity, taking my time with my hair and makeup. I pulled my hair back into a sleek chignon, leaving my face unreadable. I applied a bold crimson lipstick as a silent warning. As a final touch, I lifted my grandmother diamond and sapphire heirloom necklace, letting the cold stones settle against my collarbone. It was the same necklace my father had demanded I surrender to Ashley. Today, it would serve as the ultimate symbol of my absolute defiance. I left the penthouse and took the private elevator down to the secure garage. I did not take the modest sedan I used for my undercover life. Instead, I slid into my black custom luxury SUV. The engine roared to life with a deep hum. The drive to the financial district felt entirely different today. I was not commuting to a dreary cubicle to push papers. I was driving to the gleaming glass skyscraper housing Obsidian Holdings. I was driving to my own empire. When I pulled into the executive parking garage, the attendants immediately cleared the VIP lane. I took the dedicated elevator straight to the top floor. The doors parted to reveal the sleek, minimalist reception area of my firm. The corporate logo was subtly etched into the glass partitions. The receptionist stood up immediately as I walked past, greeting me with profound professional respect. I walked straight down the long corridor toward the primary executive boardroom. David and Benjamin were already waiting inside. The boardroom was an imposing space, dominated by a massive table carved from a single slab of black marble. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a dizzying view of the city, making anyone opposite the table feel incredibly small. I took my seat at the head. The leather chair felt like a throne. David handed me a cup of black coffee while Benjamin began arranging a series of thick, physical folders across the dark marble surface. "Good morning, Amber," Benjamin said, his voice tight with anticipation. "The trap is completely set. Security has confirmed that Jason and Richard have entered the building lobby. They brought Susan and Ashley with them." I took a slow sip of my coffee. "They brought the women I noted, keeping my expression neutral. That means Richard is terrified. He wants to project the image of a unified family front to elicit sympathy from the ruthless corporate lender he thinks he is meeting. He wants to play the concerned patriarch fighting for his legacy." "It will not help him," David replied, sliding the first thick dossier toward me. "We have compiled the final kill shots, just as you requested. Every single piece of leverage is verified and ready for deployment." I opened the first folder. It contained the complete forensic breakdown of Jason's illegal offshore wire transfer. The pages detailed the exact moment he routed $15 million to the Cayman Islands, violating our strict domestic retention covenant. We had the digital timestamps, routing numbers, and automatic default triggers. The paper trail was absolutely devastating and entirely undeniable. This alone was enough to send him to federal prison for a very long time. I moved to the second folder. It contained the fraudulent real estate documents. The pages showed where Jason had blatantly forged my father's signature in his desperate attempt to sell the family estate to the anonymous shell company developer. Benjamin had secured a sworn affidavit from the developer, confirming the attempted illegal transaction. The sheer stupidity of his actions was laid bare in black and white ink. The third folder was the most satisfying. It contained digital receipts from the novelty prank website, confirming Ashley had purchased fake ultrasound photos just hours before her miraculous pregnancy announcement. I also included her empty medical calendar and the audio recording of my mother slapping me at the country club while screaming that I was dead to this family. "They are entirely out of options," Benjamin stated, adjusting his glasses. "The county recorder has accepted the liens against the logistics firm, the commercial properties, and the suburban estate. Their names may remain on the titles until foreclosure is completed, but every major asset is encumbered. We hold enforceable security interests, and the court process is already moving." I closed the folders, arranging them in a perfectly straight line. "I am not just going to fire them today," I said, my voice dropping to a harsh, chilling whisper. "I am going to annihilate their entire existence. I want them to feel the exact same helplessness they tried to force upon me. I want them to look at the woman they relentlessly mocked and realize she is the architect of their total destruction." David smiled, a cold expression that mirrored my own. We instructed lobby security to deliberately delay their visitor badges by 15 minutes. He mentioned checking his watch. We wanted them to wait in the atrium and feel the full, intimidating weight of this building. Desperate people sweat when they are forced to wait. "Excellent strategy," I murmured, resting my hands against the cool marble table. Let them sweat. Let them imagine a faceless, tyrannical billionaire sitting up here waiting to devour their company. Let them rehearse their pathetic apologies and desperate pleas for corporate mercy. The internal communication system chimed softly. The receptionist voice filled the room. "Excuse me, Miss Wilson. Your 10 o'clock appointments have just arrived at the main entrance." I exchanged a glance with David. "Send them through the standard visitor screening," I instructed. "Do not announce my name. Once their badges are issued, escort them directly to the executive boardroom and leave them alone long enough to believe the chief executive officer is deliberately making them wait." Benjamin gathered the folders, while Sarah, our senior litigation specialist, entered through the side door, carrying the federal compliance documents. The four of us moved into the adjacent observation room, rather than remaining in the boardroom. A one-way glass panel and secured audio system allowed us to monitor the room without being seen. From there, I could watch their behavior before deciding exactly when to appear. David placed the financial dossiers on a narrow console. Benjamin checked the sworn statement from the developer and the certified transaction logs one final time. Sarah confirmed that the arrest warrant had been obtained independently by federal investigators after reviewing the evidence referred through counsel. The agents were waiting in a secured conference room on the same floor and would enter only after Jason had been formally identified and the meeting record established his presence. I picked up the tablet connected to the lobby security feed. My family believed they were arriving to negotiate with an anonymous executive who might be persuaded by status apologies or threats. They did not know I was watching from behind the wall, or that every lawful consequence of Jason's actions was already moving into position. On the screen, the main doors began to open, and the four of them stepped into my building. The heavy glass doors of the Obsidian Holdings skyscraper slid open to admit the four people who had made my life a living nightmare. From my hidden vantage point observing the high-resolution security feed on the tablet securely in my hand, I watched them cross the expansive imported marble lobby floor. They moved in a tight cluster, attempting to project an aura of unshakable confidence, but their body language betrayed their profound panic. Richard walked slightly ahead of the group, his shoulders pulled back stiffly as he tried to mask the tremor in his hands. Susan trailed close behind him, wearing her most expensive designer dress and carrying a limited edition handbag, as if those luxury items could somehow serve as a magical shield against federal bankruptcy. Ashley walked with her arm linked through Jason, holding her fake pregnant stomach and looking around the minimalist lobby with an expression of intense disdain. They approached the primary reception desk with the exact same suffocating, intolerable arrogance they regularly displayed at their highly exclusive suburban country club during Sunday brunches. I watched the live video feed as Richard aggressively tapped his fingers against the polished stone counter, demanding immediate service. When the receptionist politely asked them to wait in the designated visitor lounge, Jason snapped at her, complaining that they were VIP clients who did not have time to sit around with commoners. Susan immediately chimed in, demanding that an assistant bring them 4 coffees, specifying ridiculous temperature requirements and specialized milk alternatives. They treated the polite corporate staff like indentured servants, entirely oblivious to the fact that every single employee in this building worked directly for me. The young receptionist maintained her absolutely flawless professional composure, smiling politely as she handed them their required visitor badges. She directed them toward the dedicated executive elevator banks that would bring them up to my floor. I carefully set the electronic tablet down on the dark marble table, feeling a deeply satisfying cold thrill of long-awaited anticipation wash over me. The executive elevator deposited them into the breathtaking glass-walled reception area just outside the primary boardroom. The towering windows offered a dizzying panoramic view of the entire city skyline, making the sprawling metropolis below look like a miniature toy set. My executive assistant escorted them into the massive boardroom, silently gesturing for them to take their seats along one side of the expansive black marble table. The room was designed to intimidate. The severe angles, the stark colors, and the sheer scale of the furniture deliberately made guests feel incredibly small and entirely powerless. I listened to the high-fidelity audio feed piped directly into the adjacent observation room, where I stood with David Benjamin and my senior litigation specialist, Sarah. Inside the boardroom, the false bravado of my family was beginning to severely crack under the oppressive silence of the room. Richard paced the length of the carpeted floor, adjusting his silk tie nervously while checking his expensive gold watch for the fourth time in 2 minutes. He muttered to Jason that they just needed to explain the liquidity situation to this chief executive officer and everything would be fine. "We are a legacy family," Richard stated, his voice echoing slightly in the cavernous space. "They will understand the value of our brand and the temporary nature of this default. We simply have to remind them who we are and demand a reasonable restructuring plan." Jason nodded enthusiastically, sweating profusely through his custom suit jacket. He looked like a man standing on the trapdoor of a gallows, desperately hoping the rope would snap. Ashley sat rigidly in a leather chair, complaining loudly that the room was too cold and the lighting was entirely unflattering. Susan shushed Ashley quickly, her voice trembling with genuine anxiety. Susan hissed that they needed to be on their absolute best behavior because the people who owned this building held the deeds to their entire lives. Hearing my mother speak with such naked fear was deeply satisfying. She was a woman who had spent decades prioritizing social climbing and superficial appearances over the emotional well-being of her own daughter. She had slapped me in public to defend the sister who stole my husband, and now she was trembling in an office chair praying for corporate mercy. I turned away from the audio monitor and looked at my legal team. David held the thick dossiers containing the finalized kill shots. Benjamin held the digital tablets required for the mandatory signature authorizations. Sarah held the federal compliance documents that would legally finalize the complete seizure of Apex Transit and the suburban estate. I smoothed the lapels of my midnight blue designer suit, ensuring every single detail of my appearance was perfectly immaculate. The heavy sapphire and diamond heirloom necklace rested against my collarbone, a silent testament to my impending victory. I took one final deep breath, filling my lungs with the cool, conditioned air of my skyscraper. The years of quiet, suffering, the endless insults, the quiet tears shed in the laundry room of my tiny apartment, and the profound betrayal of my marriage all crystallized into a singular, weaponized focus. I gave my legal team a sharp nod, signaling that it was finally time to execute the ultimate karmic payoff. I walked out of the observation room and stepped into the main corridor, moving with slow, deliberate purpose. My 3 high-powered corporate attorneys flanked me, forming a formidable wall of dark suits and absolute legal authority. The sharp click of my stiletto heels against the polished hardwood floor echoed down the quiet hallway, announcing my arrival like the ticking of a metronome. I reached the heavy mahogany doors of the executive boardroom and pushed them open without bothering to knock. The heavy doors clicked open smoothly, swinging wide, to reveal the 4 desperate people sitting at the massive table. The room instantly fell dead silent. The boastful muttering from Richard stopped immediately. The petty complaining from Ashley died in her throat. The nervous fussing from Susan ceased entirely. They all turned their heads toward the doorway, expecting to see a ruthless older billionaire flanked by corporate sharks. Instead, they saw me. I did not pause. I did not smile. I did not offer a single word of greeting. I walked directly into the room, exuding the terrifying air of a woman who owned the world. My legal team fanned out behind me, projecting an aura of absolute professional menace. I ignored the row of guest chairs designated for visitors and walked straight to the head of the black marble table. I pulled back the heavy leather executive chair and sat down, folding my hands neatly in front of me, resting them on the cool stone surface. For 10 agonizing seconds, nobody in the room moved or spoke. The sheer impossibility of my presence in this specific room, wearing this specific bespoke suit and commanding this specific team of elite attorneys, shattered their fragile reality. Susan blinked rapidly, her mouth falling open as if she had suddenly forgotten how to breathe. Ashley stared at my flawless hair and the sparkling heirloom necklace, her eyes widening in pure, unadulterated shock. Jason gripped the edge of the marble table so hard his knuckles turned stark white, his jaw working soundlessly as his mind struggled to process the devastating implications of my arrival. But it was Richard who reacted first. The shock on his face rapidly morphed into a defensive, explosive anger. He simply could not comprehend that the daughter he considered a pathetic failure was sitting in the seat of power. He assumed this was some sort of terrible prank or bizarre security breach. Richard shot to his feet, his face turning a dark shade of crimson. He slammed his heavy hand down onto the black marble table, causing the empty water glasses to rattle violently. "What is the meaning of this?" Richard roared, his voice vibrating with absolute fury. He turned toward my legal team, pointing a shaking finger directly at me. "I want corporate security in this boardroom right this second. How did my pathetic daughter get past the lobby desk? And how the hell did she get into this building?" David stepped forward before the echo of my father shouting could fully fade from the room. His voice was smooth and perfectly modulated, slicing through the rising panic like a scalpel. "Mr. Richard, please sit down," David instructed, gesturing calmly toward the heavy leather chairs. "We are the legal team representing Obsidian Holdings, your primary creditor." And this woman, sitting before you, David, turned slightly, gesturing a hand in my direction, with absolute, profound respect, is our founder and chief executive officer. The color drained instantly from the face of Ashley, leaving her looking like a wax mannequin. She slumped back into her chair, her hands dropping limply into her lap as her mouth formed a silent gasp. Beside her, Jason looked like he was physically going to be sick. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing erratically as sweat began to pour down his temples. Susan just stared at me, her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and completely shattered comprehension. She clutched her expensive designer handbag against her chest, as if it could somehow protect her from the reality crushing down upon them. Richard remained standing, his large frame trembling. He shook his head slowly, refusing to process the information. "This is an elaborate joke," he stammered, looking toward David and Benjamin. "You are telling me that my failure of a daughter, the woman who works as a low-level clerk downtown, is the anonymous billionaire holding the terminal default liens on my entire corporate legacy? That is entirely impossible. She does not have the intelligence or the drive to build a private equity firm." I kept my expression entirely neutral, resting my hands on the cool black marble table. "I did not work as a clerk, Dad," I said, my voice soft but carrying easily across the vast boardroom. "I built this empire from nothing over the past 5 years. I designed the automated lending algorithms that Apex Transit relied upon. I constructed the shadow subsidiaries that bought up your commercial real estate debt when traditional banks stopped returning your phone calls. You thought I was invisible because you chose to look right past me. You only saw what you wanted to see. A convenient stepping stone, a punching bag for your massive ego. I allowed you to believe that illusion because it made orchestrating your total financial ruin remarkably easy." Richard slowly lowered himself into his chair, the fight completely draining out of his posture. He looked at the massive glass windows, the expensive mahogany doors, the elite attorneys flanking me, and finally, the reality began to sink in. "You orchestrated this," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "Every single detail," I confirmed, leaning forward slightly. "I personally initiated the terminal asset default that froze your accounts. You came here today to beg a stranger for corporate mercy, to ask for a settlement that would save your suburban mansion and your logistics company. But there is no settlement to negotiate. I am the sole owner of your debt, and I am calling it all in today. I signaled to David with a brief nod. He stepped up to the table and systematically laid out the thick folders we had prepared in the observation room. I opened the first folder and pulled out a stack of banking statements, sliding them across the smooth marble surface until they stopped directly in front of Jason. These are the routing numbers and timestamp logs for the $15 million you secretly wired to offshore shadow accounts in the Cayman Islands last week. I explained, my gaze locking onto Jason. You thought you were hiding operational capital from federal auditors, but you triggered an automatic default covenant embedded deep within your corporate lending contract. That action constitutes massive federal wire fraud. I also have the forged commercial deed you attempted to sell to Downtown Development Partners last night, complete with the falsified signature of my father. Jason let out a pathetic whimpering sound, burying his face in his trembling hands. He did not attempt to deny the accusations. He simply rocked back and forth in his leather chair, completely crushed by the undeniable evidence of his monumental stupidity. Richard turned his head to glare at his son-in-law, a fresh wave of fury igniting in his eyes, but he was too terrified to speak. I closed the first folder and moved to the final piece of evidence. The room felt suffocatingly heavy as I picked up a small stack of glossy receipts. I turned my attention fully to Ashley, who was shrinking back into her seat, her hands instinctively covering her stomach. For years, my sister had taken immense pleasure in tormenting me. She had stolen my husband, flaunted her wealthy lifestyle, and manipulated my parents into handing over massive sums of money to fund her delusions of grandeur. I slid the digital receipts and printouts from the novelty prank website across the table. They fanned out perfectly, stopping right next to Ashley. You told Mom and Dad that you needed an emergency trust fund injection because you and Jason were expecting a child, I said, my voice dropping to a chilling register. You claimed you were experiencing a high-risk pregnancy and required exclusive medical care that your insurance would not cover. You used their desire for a grandchild to extract a massive sum of liquid capital to cover the luxury car leases and country club dues Jason could no longer afford. Susan gasped, leaning forward to look at the receipts. Her hands shook violently as she picked up the printout confirming the purchase of fake ultrasound photos. Ashley, please tell me this is a misunderstanding, Susan pleaded, tears spilling over her mascara. Tell me you did not invent a baby to steal money from your own father. Ashley could not look at our mother. She stared at the black marble table, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. I did not have a choice, Ashley cried, her voice cracking with desperation. Jason was failing. The logistics company was bleeding cash and the bank was threatening to repossess my cars. I could not be seen driving a massive downgrade. The girls at the club would have ruined me. I just needed enough cash to maintain appearances until the tech market rebounded. You lied to me, Richard roared, slamming his fist against the armrest of his chair. You looked me directly in the eyes and used my emotional vulnerability to extract my retirement safety net. You are a disgusting fraud. I watched them turn on each other like starving animals in a cage. The family loyalty they constantly boasted about was nothing but a fragile illusion built on greed and superficial status. The moment the money disappeared, the masks fell off completely, revealing the ugly, hollow truth beneath. There is no baby, I stated coldly, interrupting their chaotic bickering. There is only greed, and now, because of that insatiable greed, you legally own absolutely nothing. This building, the legal team, the debt, the evidence, it all belongs to me. Jason suddenly shot to his feet, knocking his heavy leather chair backward until it crashed onto the carpet. His face was pale and slick with terror. I am not going to prison, he shouted, his voice shrill and panicked. You cannot do this to me, Amber. I am leaving. I am leaving right now, and you cannot stop me." He turned and bolted toward the heavy mahogany doors, his expensive leather shoes slipping slightly on the highly polished floor. He let out a strange, panicked noise that echoed across the silent room. He reached out to grab the brass handles, desperately trying to pull them open to escape the nightmare he had created for himself. But the doors remained entirely locked. He rattled them frantically, pleading for someone to let him out into the main lobby. I remained perfectly calm, remaining in my seat at the head of the table. I reached out and deliberately pressed a small, silver security button integrated into the surface of the black marble. The heavy boardroom doors clicked and swung open inward just before Jason could grab the handles, forcing him to stumble backward in shock to reveal two federal agents. The two men standing in the doorway wore dark windbreakers with the letters FBI printed in stark white across their chests. They stepped into the executive boardroom, moving with the coordinated precision of predators who had finally cornered their prey. Jason stumbled backward, tripping over his own feet as he frantically tried to scramble away from the entrance. His expensive custom suit wrinkled and twisted as he fell hard onto the plush carpet. The lead agent, a tall man with a stern expression and sharp eyes, stepped over the threshold and pulled a folded warrant from his interior jacket pocket. "Jason Bradley," he announced, his voice booming through the sudden silence of the room. "You are under arrest for multiple counts of federal wire fraud, corporate embezzlement, and the attempted fraudulent transfer of distressed assets. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Jason scrambled backward like a terrified child, pushing himself away until his back hit the polished mahogany of the heavy boardroom doors that had swung shut behind the agents. He raised his hands in a pathetic gesture of surrender, tears streaming down his pale cheeks. "Please," he begged, his voice cracking into a high-pitched whine. "There has been a misunderstanding. I have the money. I can get the money back. It was just a temporary bridge loan. You do not understand." "I am the Chief Executive Officer of Apex Transit." The second agent did not hesitate. He moved forward swiftly, grabbing Jason by the shoulder and hauling him to his feet with a single, powerful motion. Jason whimpered as the agent swiftly spun him around, forcing his hands behind his back. The sharp metallic click of the steel handcuffs, echoing off the glass walls, sounded like a gunshot. Ashley stared at the scene unfolding before her, completely paralyzed by shock. For her entire life she had been the golden child, the beautiful, favored daughter who always got exactly what she wanted. She had stolen my husband because she felt entitled to him. She had flaunted her lavish lifestyle, her luxury cars and her country club memberships, believing she was untouchable. Now she watched as the federal agents patted down her fake chief executive officer husband, discovering the forged documents still tucked inside his suit jacket. Ashley suddenly snapped out of her trance. She let out a piercing, agonizing scream that vibrated off the floor-to-ceiling windows. "Jason!" she shrieked, stumbling forward, holding her fake pregnant stomach. "You cannot take him! We have a baby on the way! We are a legacy family! Do you know who my father is?" The lead agent turned his cold gaze toward her. "We know exactly who your father is, ma'am," the agent replied, his tone devoid of any sympathy. "And we know you are not pregnant. The fraud investigators flagged your novelty receipts this morning. Step back immediately or you will be charged with interfering with a federal arrest." Ashley froze, the color draining from her face as the last shred of her carefully constructed illusion evaporated. She looked down at the black marble table where the fake ultrasound receipts were still scattered. She had been stripped of her stolen wealth, her fraudulent husband, and her golden child status in a matter of minutes. She was left with absolutely nothing. The reality of her impending poverty hit her like a physical blow. She collapsed into one of the leather visitor chairs, sobbing uncontrollably, her perfectly manicured hands covering her face. She was completely broken. Richard watched his son-in-law being dragged toward the executive elevator, his chest heaving with heavy, erratic breaths. The patriarch of the family, the man who had demanded perfection and dictated reality for decades, was watching his entire empire burn to the ground. The federal agents disappeared down the corridor, taking Jason away to face a judge and years in a federal penitentiary. The heavy mahogany doors clicked shut, leaving the remaining members of my family trapped in the boardroom with me. Richard slowly turned his head to look at the financial documents I had laid out on the table. The foreclosure notices, the recorded liens, and the court foreclosure filings were undeniably real. His logistics and real estate legacy was entirely gone. His retirement properties had been pledged by the very man he had praised as a genius. He had spent his life stepping on others to reach the top, and now he had plummeted to the very bottom. His knees suddenly buckled beneath him. The large, imposing man dropped to the carpeted floor, landing heavily right in front of the black marble table. He looked up at me, his eyes wide, with a desperate, pathetic terror. "Amber, please!" he begged, his voice trembling as he reached out a shaking hand toward my designer suit. "You cannot do this. I am your father. I built that company from nothing. I worked my entire life for that retirement fund. You have to release the liens. You have to give me my money back. I will do anything. We will apologize. We will make it right. Please, Amber, do not leave us with nothing." I looked down at the man kneeling before me. I felt no pity. I felt no sorrow. I felt only the profound, absolute peace of a scale finally balancing. Susan was weeping hysterically in the background, clutching her designer handbag as if it could somehow shield her from bankruptcy. She was murmuring frantic prayers and apologies, but I ignored her entirely. I kept my gaze locked on my father. My expression remained a mask of chilling indifference. I slowly stood up from the heavy leather executive chair, smoothing the lapels of my midnight blue suit. The sapphire heirloom necklace rested heavily against my collarbone, catching the sunlight streaming through the massive windows. "You told me I was dead to this family," I said, my voice soft, but carrying an undeniable weight that silenced the room. "You stood at the country club and watched my mother slap me. You threatened to destroy my future if I did not sign over a loan to save your fraudulent son-in-law. You demanded I apologize for simply existing." I stepped away from the table, looking at the broken, weeping figures of my parents. "You were right," I continued, my tone devoid of any emotion. "I have no family here. You are just strangers who share my last name. You made your choices long ago, when you decided my worth was determined by my usefulness to your egos. I survived your cruelty. I built this empire in the shadows, while you were busy admiring yourselves. Now you get to live with the consequences of your own arrogance." I turned my attention to Ashley. She was still slumped in the chair, ruined and humiliated. I reached into the pocket of my blazer and pulled out a crisp $10 bill. I walked over and dropped it onto the table right next to her fake ultrasound receipts. "Here," I said softly. "Go buy a coffee. You are going to need the energy for your job hunt." Ashley flinched as if I had struck her physically, but she could not meet my eyes. I turned my back on them. I did not look at Richard still kneeling on the floor, or Susan weeping into her hands. I walked toward the heavy mahogany doors, the sharp click of my stiletto heels acknowledging against the polished hardwood. My legal team stepped aside, clearing a path for me with profound respect. I walked out of the boardroom, leaving my abusers bankrupt, humiliated, and facing the absolute ruin they had brought upon themselves. I stepped into the bright, glass-walled reception area, looking out over the sprawling city skyline. The morning sunlight washed over me, warm and bright. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the fresh air of my victory. I was entirely secure in my wealth and peace. My past was finally buried, and the entire world belonged to me. The karmic annihilation was now complete, and I was truly free to live my beautiful new life forever. The story we just witnessed is a powerful reminder that our inherent worth is never defined by the people who consistently choose to undervalue us. For years, Amber endured the cruelty and exploitation of a family that saw her only as a convenient stepping stone or a scapegoat for their own failures. They built their entire identities on a fragile illusion of superiority, assuming she would always remain the silent, accommodating victim. However, true power does not roar, it builds quietly in the shadows. Amber's journey teaches us that patience, strategy, and self-belief are the ultimate antidotes to arrogance. Instead of reacting emotionally to every insult or attempting to prove her worth to people who were deeply committed to misunderstanding her, she channeled her pain into building an undeniable empire. She understood a fundamental truth: you cannot negotiate with toxic people. You can only outgrow them and allow the weight of their own actions to hold them accountable. When the karmic scales finally balanced, it was not through petty vengeance, but through the precise execution of the truth. Her family's ruin was entirely of their own making, a direct consequence of their fraud, greed, and relentless entitlement. The most profound lesson here is about the absolute necessity of boundaries. Shared DNA does not entitle anyone to abuse you, and choosing to walk away from a toxic environment is not an act of betrayal. It is an act of profound self-preservation. Amber did not just secure her wealth, she reclaimed her peace. She proved that the greatest victory is simply living a spectacular, authentic life, where those who hurt you no longer have any power over your reality. Have you ever had to set a difficult boundary or walk away from a toxic environment to protect your own peace? Share your experiences and how you found your strength in the comments below. If Amber's journey of resilience and karmic justice resonated with you, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel for more empowering stories, and share this video with anyone who might need a reminder of their own